for their own fleet wasn't of force sufficient to engage the Aeginetans, and while they were begging the Corinthians to lend them some ships, the failure of the enterprise took place. In those days the Corinthians were on the best of terms with the Athenians, and accordingly they now yielded to their request and furnished them with 20 ships. But as their law didn't allow the ships to be given for nothing, they sold them to the Athenians for 5 drachmas apiece. As soon then as the Athenians had obtained this aid, and by manning also their own ships, had equipped a fleet of 70 sail, they crossed over to Aegina, but arrived a day later than the time agreed upon. Meanwhile Nicodemus, when he found the Athenians did not come to the time appointed, took ship and made his escape from the island. The Aeginetans who accompanied him were settled by the Athenians at Sunium, whence they were wont to issue forth and plunder the Aeginetans of the island. But this took place at a later date. When the wealthier Aeginetans had thus obtained the victory over the common people who had revolted with Nicodemus, they laid hands on a certain number of them and led them out to death. But here they were guilty of a sacrilege, which, notwithstanding all their efforts, they were never able to atone, being driven from the island before they had appeased the goddess, whom they now provoked. 700 of the common people had fallen alive into their hands, and they were all being led out to death, when one of them escaped from his chains, and flying to the gateway of the temple of Demeter the lawgiver, laid hold of the door handles and clung to them. The others sought to drag him from his refuge, but finding themselves unable to tear him away, they cut off his hands, and so took him, leaving the hands still tightly grasping the handles. Such were the doings of the Aeginetans among themselves. When the Athenians arrived, they went out to meet them with 70 ships, and a battle took place, wherein the Aeginetans suffered a defeat. Hereupon they had recourse again to their old allies, the Argives, but these latter refused now to lend them any aid, being angry, because some Aeginetan ships, which Kleomenis had taken by force, accompanied him in his invasion of Argolis, and joined in the disembarkation. The same thing had happened at the same time with certain vessels of the Sicyonians, and the Argives had laid a fine of 1,000 talents upon the misdoers, 500 upon each, whereupon they of Sicyon acknowledged themselves to have sinned, and agreed with the Argives to pay them 100 talents, and so be quit of the debt. But the Aeginetans would make no acknowledgment at all, and showed themselves proud and stiff-necked. For this reason, when they now prayed the Argives for aid, the state refused to send them a single soldier. Notwithstanding, volunteers joined them from Argos to the number of 1,000, under a captain Eurybates, a man skilled in the pentathlete contests. Of these men the greater part never returned, but were slain by the Athenians in Aegina. Eurybates, their captain, fought a number of single combats, and after killing 3 men in this way, was himself slain by the 4th, who was a Decelean named Sophones. Afterwards the Aeginetans fell upon the Athenian fleet when it was in some disorder, and beat it, capturing 4 ships with their crews. Thus did war rage between the Aeginetans and Athenians. Meantime the Persian pursued his own design, from day to day, exhorted by his servant to remember the Athenians, and likewise urged continually by the Pisistratidae, who were ever accusing their countrymen. Moreover, it pleased him well to have a pretext for carrying war into Greece, so that he might reduce all those who had refused to give him earth and water. As for Mardonius, since his expedition had succeeded so ill, Darius took the command of the troops from him and appointed other generals in his stead, who were to lead the host against Eretria and Athens, to wit, Datis, who was by descent a Mede, and Artaphernes, the son of Artaphernes, his own nephew. These men received orders to carry Athens and Eretria away captive, and to bring the prisoners into his presence. So the new commanders took their departure from the court and went down to Cilicia to the Elaean plain, having with them a numerous and well-appointed land army. Encamping here, they were joined by the sea force which had been required of the several states, and at the same time by the horse transports which Darius had, the year before, commanded his tributaries to make ready. Aboard these the horses were embarked, and the troops were received by the ships of war, after which the whole fleet, amounting in all to 600 triremes, made sail for Ionia. Thence, instead of proceeding with a straight course along the shore to the Hellespont and to Thrace, they loosed from Samos and voyaged across the Icarian Sea through the midst of the islands, mainly, as I believe, because they feared the danger of doubling Mount Athos, where the year before they had suffered so grievously on their passage. But a constraining cause also was their former failure to take Naxos. When the Persians, therefore, approaching from the Icarian Sea, cast anchor at Naxos, which, recollecting what there befell them formerly, they had determined to attack before any other state, the Naxians, instead of encountering them, took to flight and hurried off to the hills. The Persians, however, succeeded in laying hands on some, and them they carried away captive, while at the same time they burnt all the temples together with the town. This done, they left Naxos and sailed away to the other islands. While the Persians were thus employed, the Delians likewise quitted Delos and took refuge at Tenos. And now the expedition drew near, when Datis sailed forward in advance of the other ships, commanding them, instead of anchoring at Delos, to rendezvous at Rhenea over against Delos, while he himself proceeded to discover whither the Delians had fled. After which he sent a herald to them with this message: "Why are ye fled, O holy men? Why have ye judged me so harshly and so wrongfully? I've surely sense enough, even had not the king so ordered, to spare the country which gave birth to the two gods, to spare, I say, both the country and its inhabitants. Come back therefore to your dwellings, and once more inhabit your island." Such was the message which Datis sent by his herald to the Delians. He likewise placed upon the altar 300 talents weight of frankincense, and offered it. After this he sailed with his whole host against Eretria, taking with him both Ionians and Aeolians. When he was departed, Delos, as the Delians told me, was shaken by an earthquake, the first and last shock that has been felt to this day. And truly this was a prodigy, whereby the god warned men of the evils that were coming upon them. For in the 3 following generations of Darius, the son of Hystaspes, Xerxes, the son of Darius, and Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes, more woes befell Greece than in the 20 generations preceding Darius. Woes caused in part by the Persians, but in part arising from the contentions among their own chief men respecting the supreme power. Wherefore it's not surprising that Delos, though it had never before been shaken, should at that time have felt the shock of an earthquake. And indeed there was an oracle which said of Delos, "Delos' self will I shake, which never yet has been shaken." Of the above names, Darius may be rendered worker, Xerxes warrior, and Artaxerxes great warrior. And so might we call these kings in our own language with propriety. The barbarians, after loosing from Delos, proceeded to touch at the other islands, and took troops from each, and likewise carried off a number of the children as hostages. Going thus from one to another, they came at last to Carystus, but here the hostages were refused by the Christians, who said they would neither give any nor consent to bear arms against the cities of their neighbours, meaning Athens and Eretria. Hereupon the Persians laid siege to Carystus and wasted the country round, until at length the inhabitants were brought over and agreed to do what was required of them. Meanwhile the Eretrians, understanding that the Persian armament was coming against them, besought the Athenians for assistance. nor did the Athenians refuse their aid, but assigned to them as auxiliaries the 4,000 landholders to whom they had allotted the estates of the Chalcidian Hippopotami. At Eretria, however, things were in no healthy state, for though they had called in the aid of the Athenians, yet they weren't agreed among themselves how they should act. Some of them were minded to leave the city and to take refuge in the heights of Euboea, while others, who looked to receiving a reward from the Persians, were making ready to betray their country. So when these things came to the ears of Aeschines, the son of Nophon, one of the first men in Eretria, he made known the whole state of affairs to the Athenians, who were already arrived, and besought them to return home to their own land, and not perish with his countrymen. And the Athenians hearkened to his counsel, and crossing over to Oropus, in this way escaped the danger. The Persian fleet now drew near and anchored at Temeinae, Coriae, and Aegilia, 3 places in the territory of Eretria. Once masters of these posts, they proceeded forthwith to disembark their horses, and made ready to attack the enemy. But the Eretrians weren't minded to sally forth and offer battle. Their only care, after it had been resolved not to quit the city, was, if possible, to defend their walls. And now the fortress was assaulted in good earnest, and for 6 days there fell on both sides vast numbers. But on the 7th day Euphorbus, the son of Alcimachus, and Philagris, the son of Caeneus, who were both citizens of good repute, betrayed the place to the Persians. These were no sooner entered within the walls than they plundered and burnt all the temples that there were in the town, in revenge for the burning of their own temples at Sardis. Moreover, they did according to the orders of Darius, and carried away captive all the inhabitants. The Persians, having thus brought Eretria into subjection, after waiting a few days, made sail for Attica, greatly straitening the Athenians as they approached, and thinking to deal with them as they had dealt with the people of Eretria. And because there was no place in all Attica so convenient for their horse as Marathon, and it lay moreover quite close to Eretria, therefore Hippias, the son of Pisistratus, conducted them thither. When intelligence of this reached the Athenians, they likewise marched their troops to Marathon, and there stood on the defensive, having at their head 10 generals, of whom one was Miltiadis. Now this man's father, Cimon, the son of Stesagoras, was banished from Athens by Pisistratus, the son of Hippocrates. In his banishment it was his fortune to win the 4-horse chariot race at Olympia, whereby he gained the very same honour which had before been carried off by Miltiades, his half-brother on the mother's side. At the next Olympiad he won the prize again with the same mares, upon which he caused Pisistratus to be proclaimed the winner, having made an agreement with him that on yielding him this honour he should be allowed to come back to his country. Afterwards, still with the same mares, he won the prize a 3rd time, whereupon he was put to death by the sons of Pisistratus, whose father was no longer living. They set men to lie in wait for him secretly, and these men slew him near the government house in the night time. He was buried outside the city, beyond what is called the Valley Road, and right opposite his tomb were buried the mares which had won the 3 prizes. The same success had likewise been achieved once previously, to wit by the mares of Evagaras the Lacedaemonian, but never except by them. At the time of Cimon's death, Stesagoras, the elder of his 2 sons, was in the Chersonese, where he lived with Miltiades his uncle. The younger, who was called Miltiades after the founder of the Chersonesite colony, was with his father in Athens. It was this Miltiades who now commanded the Athenians after escaping from the Chersonese, and twice nearly losing his life. First he was chased as far as Imbrus by the Phoenicians, who had a great desire to take him and carry him up to the king, and when he had avoided this danger, and having reached his own country, thought himself to be altogether in safety, he found his enemies waiting for him, and was cited by them before a court, and impeached for his tyranny in the Chersonese. but he came off victorious here likewise, and was thereupon made general of the Athenians by the free choice of the people. And first, before they left the city, the generals sent off to Sparta a herald, one Phidippides, who was by birth an Athenian, and by profession and practice a trained runner. This man, according to the account which he gave to the Athenians on his return, when he was near Mount Parthenium, above Tegea, fell in with the god Pan, who called him by his name, and bade him ask the Athenians whereof they neglected him so entirely, when he was kindly disposed towards them, and had often helped them in times past, and would do so again in time to come. The Athenians, entirely believing in the truth of this report, as soon as their affairs were once more in good order, set up a temple to Pan under the Acropolis, and in return for the message which I have recorded, established in his honour yearly sacrifices and a torch race. On the occasion of which we speak, when Phidippides was sent by the Athenian generals, and according to his own account saw Pan on his journey, he reached Sparta on the very next day after quitting the city of Athens. Upon his arrival he went before the rulers and said to them, Men of Lacedaemon, the Athenians beseech you to hasten to their aid, and not allow that state which is the most ancient in all Greece to be enslaved by the barbarians. Eretria, look you, is already carried away captive, and Greece weakened by the loss of no mean city. Thus did Phidippides deliver the message committed to him. And the Spartans wished to help the Athenians, but were unable to give them any present succour, as they didn't like to break their established law. It was then the 9th day of the first decade, and they couldn't march out of Sparta on the 9th, when the moon had not reached the full, so they waited for the full of the moon. The barbarians were conducted to Marathon by Hippias, the son of Pisistratus, who the night before had seen a strange vision in his sleep. He dreamt of lying in his mother's arms, and conjectured the dream to mean that he would be restored to Athens, recover the power which he had lost, and afterwards live to a good old age in his native country. Such was the sense in which he interpreted the vision. He now proceeded to act as guide to the Persians, and in the first place he landed the prisoners taken from Eretria upon the island that's called Aegina, a tract belonging to the Styrians, after which he brought the fleet to anchor off Marathon and marshalled the bands of the barbarians as they disembarked. As he was thus employed, it chanced that he sneezed, and at the same time coughed with more violence than was his wont. Now as he was a man advanced in years, and the greater number of his teeth were loose, it so happened that one of them was driven out with the force of the cough, and fell down into the sand. Hippias took all the pains he could to find it, but the tooth was nowhere to be seen. Whereupon he fetched a deep sigh, and said to the bystanders, After all, the land is not ours, and we shall never be able to bring it under. All my share in it is the portion of which my tooth has possession. So Hippias believed that in this way his dream was out. The Athenians were drawn up in order of battle in a sacred close belonging to Heracles, when they were joined by the Plataeans, who came in full force to their aid. Some time before, the Plataeans had put themselves under the rule of the Athenians, and these last had already undertaken many labours on their behalf. The occasion of the surrender was the following. The Plataeans suffered grievous things at the hands of the men of Thebes. So, as it chanced that Kleomenis, the son of Anaxandridas, and the Lacedaemonians were in their neighbourhood, they first of all offered to surrender themselves to them, but the Lacedaemonians refused to receive them, and said, We dwell too far off from you, and ours would be but chill succour. Ye might oftentimes be carried into slavery before one of us heard of it. We counsel you rather to give yourselves up to the Athenians, who are your next neighbours, and well able to shelter you. This, they said, not so much out of goodwill towards the Plataeans, as because they wished to involve the Athenians in trouble by engaging them in wars with the Boeotians. The Plataeans, however, when the Lacedaemonians gave them this counsel, complied at once, and when the sacrifice to the 12 gods was being offered at Athens, they came and sat as suppliants about the altar, and gave themselves up to the Athenians. The Thebans no sooner learnt what the Plataeans had done than instantly they marched out against them, while the Athenians sent troops to their aid. As the two armies were about to join battle, the Corinthians, who chanced to be at hand, wouldn't allow them to engage. Both sides consented to take them for arbitrators, whereupon they made up the quarrel, and fixed the boundary line between the two states upon this condition, to wit, that if any of the Boeotians wished no longer to belong to Boeotia, the Thebans should allow them to follow their own inclinations. The Corinthians, when they had thus decreed, forthwith departed to their homes. The Athenians likewise set off on their return, but the Boeotians fell upon them during the march, and a battle was fought wherein they were worsted by the Athenians. Hereupon these last wouldn't be bound by the line which the Corinthians had fixed, but advanced beyond those limits, and made the Asopus the boundary line between the country of the Thebans and that of the Plataeans and Hessians. Under such circumstances did the Plataeans give themselves up to Athens, and now they were come to Marathon to bear the Athenians aid. The Athenian generals were divided in their opinions, and some advised not to risk a battle, because they were too few to engage such a host as that of the Medes, while others were for fighting at once, and among these last was Miltiadis. He therefore, seeing that opinions were thus divided, and that the less worthy counsel appeared likely to prevail, resolved to go to the Polemarch and have a conference with him. For the man on whom the lot fell to be Polemarch at Athens was entitled to give his vote with the 10 generals, since anciently the Athenians allowed him an equal right of voting with them. The Polemarch at this juncture was Kleomenis of Aphidne. To him therefore Miltiadis went, and said, "With thee it rests, Kleomenis, either to bring Athens to slavery, or by securing her freedom to leave behind thee to all future generations a memory beyond even Harmodius and Aristogeiton. For never since the time that the Athenians became a people were they in so great a danger as now. If they bow their necks beneath the yoke of the Medes, the woes which they will have to suffer when given into the power of Hippias are already determined on. If, on the other hand, they fight and overcome, Athens may rise to be the very first city in Greece. How it comes to pass that these things are likely to happen, and how the determining of them in some sort rests with thee, I will now proceed to make clear. We generals are 10 in number, and our votes are divided. Half of us wish to engage, half to avoid a combat. Now, if we do not fight, I look to see a great disturbance at Athens which will shake men's resolutions, and then I fear they will submit themselves. But if we fight the battle before any unsoundness show itself among our citizens, let the gods but give us fair play, and we are well able to overcome the enemy. On thee, therefore, we depend in this matter, which lies wholly in thine own power. Thou hast only to add thy vote to my side, and thy country will be free, and not free only, but the first state in Greece. Or, if thou preferest to give thy vote to them who would decline the combat, then the reverse will follow." Miltiadis by these words gained Kleomenis, and the addition of the Polemarch's vote caused the decision to be in favour of fighting. Hereupon all those generals who had been desirous of hazarding a battle, when their turn came to command the army, gave up their right to Miltiadis. He, however, though he accepted their offers, nevertheless waited, and would not fight until his own day of command arrived in due course. Then, at length, when his own turn was come, the Athenian battle was set in array, and this was the order of it. Callimachus, the Polemarch, led the right wing, for it was at that time a rule with the Athenians to give the right wing to the Polemarch. After this followed the tribes, according as they were numbered in an unbroken line, while last of all came the Plataeans, forming the left wing. And ever since that day it has been a custom with the Athenians, in the sacrifices and assemblies held each 5th year at Athens, for the Athenian herald to implore the blessing of the gods on the Plataeans, conjointly with the Athenians. Now as they marshalled the host upon the field of Marathon, in order that the Athenian front might be of equal length with the median, the ranks of the centre were diminished, and it became the weakest part of the line, while the wings were both made strong with a depth of many ranks. So when the battle was set in array, and the victims showed themselves favourable, instantly the Athenians, so soon as they were let go, charged the barbarians at a run. Now the distance between the two armies was little short of 8 furlongs. The Persians, therefore, when they saw the Greeks coming on at speed, made ready to receive them, although it seemed to them that the Athenians were bereft of their senses and bent upon their own destruction, for they saw a mere handful of men coming on at a run without either horsemen or archers. Such was the opinion of the barbarians. But the Athenians in close array fell upon them and fought in a manner worthy of being recorded. They were the first of the Greeks, so far as I know, who introduced the custom of charging the enemy at a run, and they were likewise the first who dared to look upon the Median garb and to face men clad in that fashion. Until this time the very name of the Medes had been a terror to the Greeks to hear. The two armies fought together on the plain of Marathon for a length of time, and in the mid-battle, where the Persians themselves and the Sacae had their place, the barbarians were victorious, and broke and pursued the Greeks into the inner country. But on the two wings, the Athenians and the Plataeans defeated the enemy. Having so done, they suffered the routed barbarians to fly at her ease, and joining the two wings in one, fell upon those who had broken their own centre, and fought and conquered them. These likewise fled, and now the Athenians hung upon the runaways, and cut them down, chasing them all the way to the shore, on reaching which they laid hold of the ships, and called aloud for fire. It was in the struggle here that Callimachus, the Polemarch, after greatly distinguishing himself, lost his life. Stesilaus, too, the son of Phasaeus, one of the generals, was slain. And Canagerus, the son of Euphorion, having seized on a vessel of the enemy's by the ornament at the stern, had his hand cut off by the blow of an axe, and so perished, as likewise did many other Athenians of note and name. Nevertheless, the Athenians secured in this way 7 of the vessels, while with the remainder the barbarians pushed off, and taking aboard their Eretrian prisoners from the island where they had left them, doubled Cape Sunium, hoping to reach Athens before the return of the Athenians. The Alcmaeonidae were accused by their countrymen of suggesting this course to them. They had, it was said, an understanding with the Persians, and made a signal to them by raising a shield after they were embarked in their ships. The Persians accordingly sailed round Sunium, but the Athenians with all possible speed marched away to the defence of their city, and succeeded in reaching Athens before the appearance of the barbarians. And as their camp at Marathon had been pitched in a precinct of Heracles, so now they encamped in another precinct of the same god at Kynosarges. The barbarian fleet arrived, and lay to off Phalerum, which was at that time the haven of Athens, but after resting a while upon their oars, they departed and sailed away to Asia. There fell in this battle of Marathon on the side of the barbarians about 6,400 men. On that of the Athenians 192. Such was the number of the slain on the one side and the other. A strange prodigy likewise happened at this fight. Epizelus, the son of Cuphagorus, an Athenian, was in the thick of the fray, and behaving himself as a brave man should, when suddenly he was stricken with blindness, without blow of sword or dart, and this blindness continued thenceforth during the whole of his after-life. The following is the account which he himself, as I've heard, gave of the matter. He said that a gigantic warrior with a huge beard, which